Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'll read a little from my cell phone, if you excuse me. Welcome to the first seminar in the series, What Can Ignorance Teach Us? Or What Can We Learn from Ignorance? This series is a joint presentation from the Institute of Advanced Studies of the University of São Paulo and of the Institute Question of Science, a private non-profit organization which aims to promote the uptake of scientific knowledge in public policy and to inform the public on questions of fact about science, non-science, and pseudoscience. These seminars will be held periodically, every 2 weeks. Please refer to the Institute of Advanced Sciences website for the complete program and any updates. Our speaker today is Dr. Stuart Wise, who was kind enough to come all the way from the United States to share his experience and expertise with us. Dr. Wise is a psychologist, author, among others, of the book Believing in Magic, a standard textbook on the psychology of superstition. Today's presentation is called Why People Believe What They Believe. After the talk, there will be time for questions, but I'd like to ask those to be as brief as possible and to be real questions, not personal statements. Individual feelings and personal anecdotes will be more welcome by the coffee table after the event. Before passing the word to Dr. Wise, I'd like to share with you some answers to 3 deep psychological questions we sent him a few days ago. His answers will help all of you to better understand him. Here they are. First question, what is your toothbrush sequence? Professor Wise gave us the following answer. Now that I think of it, my toothbrush sequence is not very efficient. Toothpaste applied to a dry brush, which I then wet with water. This sometimes results in washing the paste down to the sink before I can get it into my mouth. I probably needed to change that. Second, what do you think about putting ketchup on a pizza? His answer, I'd like to say no ketchup on a pizza. I think many things go well on a pizza. There is a place in New Haven, Connecticut, that's specialized in mashed potato and bacon pizza. That is surprisingly good. But ketchup is too closely associated with hot dogs, hamburgers, and French fried potatoes. Ketchup and French fried potatoes is also a sensible topic, yeah. I imagine a hamburger pizza might be good, but I still wouldn't put ketchup on it. Third question is an ontological question. Do you think that hot dogs are sandwiches? His answer, I consider a hot dog to be a sandwich. It is meat surrounded by bread on 3 sides. Americans don't eat very many things with their hands, but sandwiches and hot dogs would not be eaten any other way. By the way, I love hot dogs and have a particular attraction to street foods in general. I hope to sample what Brazil has to offer while I'm here. I hope you don't, seriously. Well, now I leave Dr. Wise with you. I will go down and I'll be here back to mediate during the question and answer period. Thank you.
Is this working? You can hear me? Good. Thank you, Carlos. And I have many thank yous. I want to thank, first of all, the Institute Question of Science for bringing me to Brazil, and Natalia Pasternak in particular, who, if you know her, is a force. And I think that the Institute will be very successful, largely because of her energy and planning. And so, and of course, when I found out about it, given my own interest, it was something that I very much wanted to be a part of. So I'm very happy to be here. And I want to thank the Institute for Advanced Studies for sponsoring the talk today. And I also want to thank all of you for letting me speak English. I'm painfully aware that if any of you were giving the talk today, it would probably be in Portuguese. And I feel as though I'm very privileged to be able to speak to you in English today because I couldn't do it any other way. So thank you for learning English. I'm obviously the benefactor of the great success of British imperialism that allows me to go to places and speak in my native tongue when other people don't. So anyway, this is the talk, the title of the talk, and as any of you who are academics know, there's a thing that happens where long before you come to a place to talk, you're asked for a title and maybe a brief description of what you're going to say. And time passes, and then you come close to when you're going to give the talk, and you realize, oh boy, this was a bad idea. This is not a good title for the talk. And what I realized about this one is that it's a little broad. It would take many books and many shelves of books to answer this particular question, which, by the way, has no question mark. So I'm going to talk about just a very small piece of this topic. I'm going to talk about how some false beliefs come to us, and particularly the talk will have implications for moral judgment and also some political overtones. So we'll get to talk about some politics as well. So I also want to point out that I think that the title of the series is kind of a curious one. I was attracted to that as well. Epistemology being the study of knowledge, and then ignorance is the absence of knowledge. And so I think that it's a sort of a paradox, the whole topic. But I'm going to come at it from a point of view of something that has concerned me in most of my research. As you heard, I've written on superstition, but I'm also very much interested in the broad topic of rationality. So can you see? You can. Okay, good. It is the case that in the world of philosophy, beliefs are something that are thought to drive our actions. Philosophers put a lot of stock in the idea that you establish a belief, and then what you do follows from that belief. That may be true sometimes, but it's actually very much from the psychological point of view, it's very much up for debate. And what I'm going to do is to work off of, for today at least, if you'll allow me, I'm going to work from a model that I have found useful, a version of rational choice. And so just for background, if you're not familiar with it, it does come out of economics primarily. It comes from Adam Smith's basic ideas about maximization and individual people making choices that maximize their utility or happiness. And it has been updated more recently by expected utility theory, which sort of adds judgments based on probability, the likelihood that something will produce the thing you're looking for. So it is a standard model. It has, of course, been challenged a lot by research by people like Kahneman and Tversky. Daniel Kahneman wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which some of you may have heard of, that has much of the research that shows that we are not rational. In many instances, we are not. And I'm very much going to follow that lead as well today. I'm deciding whether to use this or that. So let's see. Try it. Okay, that works. So here's a little picture that I drew. It's a version of the rational choice model that I have sort of adapted. It's based on something that John Elster has used in the past, but it has a couple of features to it. First of all, the box represents our bodies. Things that are going on inside the body are inside the box, and then outside the box is the world. It's very simple. And so you have on the left, you have our desires, things that we want out of life, and you have on the right our beliefs about the world. And a lot of the activity of today is going to be in that bottom right corner, where you're establishing beliefs by getting evidence from the environment, from the world, using logic, and hopefully in the rational choice model, you're doing that very well. There are no mistakes. And the circle is meant to suggest that if you don't have complete knowledge and there's time, you may have to repeat those operations and do that over again. And so the establishment of good beliefs is important in the model. And so the desires and the beliefs together make our actions. We have certain goals we want to accomplish. Based on our beliefs, we take certain actions, right? The broken arrow in between the two is to suggest that what you want should not drive your beliefs. This is what an example of doing this would be the mistake of wishful thinking. You know, I would love to believe that I am a multimillionaire or that I will be one soon. But if I were to take action on that belief, because it's false, that would be very dangerous and would not be a rational thing. And so, unfortunately, much of research suggests that we actually we use that broken line. We shouldn't, but we do. So, I'm going to go on a little bit with the model. Some of the assumptions of the model are that our beliefs do determine our actions instead of the other way around, that we work from our beliefs to our actions. Beliefs are based on evidence and logic, and so therefore, under this model, then our actions, the actions that we choose, are the best ways to accomplish our goals based on what we know, the knowledge that we have and what's available to us. But the model does account for the fact that you may not have absolute knowledge. You may be wrong about the world. Your beliefs may be wrong, but if at least you have based them on what you have available to you, then you're rational. Your beliefs don't have to be accurate for them to be rational for you. And also, similarly, as a result, your actions don't have to actually be successful as long as they were the right thing to do in your context. If it doesn't achieve the goal, that's possible because you had limited information and you did the best you could. So the implications of the model are that at very least, in hindsight, we shouldn't think that we should have done something differently. You know, we have no reason to think that it should have gone another way based on the information we had, and our actions were correct given our beliefs and desires. So I present this model primarily as a standard. I'm not saying that we do it. In fact, there's much of what follows this is going to suggest that we don't do this. But I think that is a worthy goal, something that we should strive for. And we can argue about that, discuss that later. But I'm going to admit my prejudice from the beginning. So, with respect to this model, modern psychology has begun to question all these assumptions as far as it is the case that the economists believe that we really were rational. I mean, this is why Kahneman and Tversky were so ground-shaking with their research, was that the standard had been the belief that humans are rational all the time and they do the right thing given the circumstance. And so Kahneman and Tversky made a big career out of just showing time after time that we don't do the right thing according to the model. And also, some of the research I'm going to talk about today suggests that the relationship between beliefs and actions might actually be reversed. That we take an action and we fit our beliefs to the action or to the things that we want. And again, I look forward to discussing that with you as well. Which leads to the question, in some cases, how important are beliefs? There are the examples that I'm going to point to today challenge the notion that if beliefs are not the thing that drive our actions, if something else drives our actions, then maybe we should be focusing on that something else rather than our beliefs. Okay, so none of the research I'm going to talk about today is my own. I'm going to start by talking about some research that comes out of experimental philosophy. And it's interesting, I now refer to myself as an armchair behavioral scientist. And I happen to be in an armchair right now, so that's fitting. And at the point at which I went into the armchair and stopped doing research, philosophers began getting out of their armchairs. They had been armchair philosophers and began doing research. It's very much like psychology research, and they've come up with some interesting findings. And so I'm going to talk briefly about a very famous effect. Anybody heard of the Knobe effect before, or the side effect effect? Okay, good. So this is a case, it's a very simple experiment that comes up with a result that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense just from a logical point of view. So it's called the Knobe effect, named after Joshua Knobe of Yale University, who discovered it, or the side effect effect. So here's the setup for this experiment. There's a business, and the vice president of the business has a new project that he wants to introduce, and so he talks to the president about it. So the guy on the left is the vice president, and the guy on the right is the president. And these pictures come from a very entertaining video that has been produced to explain the experiment. So what happens is there are two conditions, two very simple conditions in the experiment. They produce very different results. The first condition is the harm condition. So the vice president comes to the president and says, "We are thinking of starting a new program. It will help us increase profits, but it will also harm the environment." The president down there says, "I don't care at all about harming the environment. I just wanted to make as much profit as I can. Let's start the new program." So they do, and of course, the environment is harmed. Outcome, they start the new program. Sure enough, the environment was harmed. So one group of participants reads this little story, okay? Then another group of participants reads a very close version of that, but different in an important way. Set up two, vice president, "We are thinking of starting a new program. It will help us increase profits, but it will also help the environment." Right, one word change. The president, "I don't care at all about helping the environment. I just want to make as much profit as I can. Let's start the new program." They do, and lo and behold, the environment is helped. You can imagine birds singing now in this section, and the environment is helped. So the thing that they wanted to measure, now, as you can see, this sets up a situation where you have a main thing that they're interested in, profits. In both conditions, all they care about is profits. All the president cares about is profits. But there's also this side effect of either helping or harming, right? And the question that they ask is did the president intentionally hurt or help the environment? Intention. So here we are making a judgment about other people. What do we believe about that person? Did the person intentionally help or harm? Well, interestingly, these are the results. When the person was in the help condition, so birds chirping, blah, 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 over 75% said no, he did not intentionally help the environment, right? The harm condition, even larger groups said yes, he did. It was intentional. He harmed the environment, and it was intentional. Okay, so logically, this shouldn't happen, right? Our judgment of the intention of the person in both cases should be the same. It's just that the outcome was different, right? And of course, our feeling about the president is different in those two situations. So what it suggests is that the moral content of the outcome, our feeling about that outcome, has a powerful effect on our belief about the person who did it, right? And so that shouldn't happen, but we are, of course, in a situation, in most cases, when someone does something bad, the next question we try to answer is, did they do that bad thing intentionally or not? We put a lot of stock in the free choice of that individual. If they did it freely, then we feel like we are we are in a position where we can punish that person. We can make them pay a cost for it. I think it's in some ways very interesting that when it comes to the helping the environment part, we don't want to give them credit for that at all, the positive credit either. So here's a case where I would suggest that the outcome colors our view of the actual facts of the case. Just to belabor this point a little bit more, and this leads into another study that is interesting. But in the United States, and I assume that this is true in Brazil as well, or something like it, that crimes are given different punishments depending upon the level of intent that the person seems to show, right? So in the U.S., the crime of murder, which would have the most severe punishment, involves intentional killing, premeditated, meaning you thought about it, it wasn't impulsive, you planned it, suggests more intent, more planning, and with knowledge of right and wrong. You knew it was wrong when you did it, but you did it anyway, right? So a lot of intentional sort of free choice there. Voluntary manslaughter is that you did still intend, but it was a much more impulsive, under the heat of emotion, quickly, right? Maybe you didn't have time to think about it, so your intention level was a bit lower, and your punishment would be lower. And then finally, there is involuntary manslaughter, which you're in the act of doing something that by accident kills someone. You still caused the death. It was in some sense, your fault, but it was actually not your initial intention to do it. And so that, this represents a hierarchy. So we clearly put a lot of stock into making this judgment. This is what they call mens rea, the idea of a guilty mind, that your mind was involved in the process. So theoretically, when we make a judgment of punishment, it should work like this, right? That we observe what the action was, we then judge the degree of intention involved, and then we assign a punishment to it based on that. So at least that's the way we think it is. But it turns out that that's obviously not the way we do it. Here's another case that involves recycling. Now, do we do recycling like this in Brazil? This is we separate in the United States. We separate our trash out into things that can be recycled and so forth. I'm sorry, I have to go into this, but so this is a case where a robbery of sorts has taken place, and again, the questions of intent go into it, but we know a little bit more about the person who's doing the quote crime. So first, and again, it's two scenarios. Two different groups of people would read these scenarios and then make a judgment about it. So the first, immoral case. Sam, a teacher. I'm interested to find that a teacher is added there just to make Sam a little bit more real. Sam, a teacher, wakes up one morning and finds that someone robbed his home while he was sleeping. His window is broken and all of his valuables are missing. After a police investigation, he learns that the robber is unemployed, has 2 children, and sold all of his belongings. So we get some information about the criminal or the person who did the act, which suggests that the degree to which they were under some constraints. They're unemployed, need money, they have 2 children that they're trying to support, and so forth. Second version of the scenario is less severe, right? It's the act itself is less severe, but the constraints on the actor, the person who did it, are the same. So we have Sam, a teacher, wakes up one morning and finds that someone rooted through his recycling bin at the end of his driveway while he was sleeping. Now, this would not be an illegal act in most places. Once you put your trash out to the street, people can take it, and it's not considered a crime. But anyway, so there's no mess, but all of his aluminum cans are missing. After talking to his neighbors, he learns that the person is unemployed, has 2 children, and sells the cans to a recycling company. So the what we know about the person who did the action is the same in both cases, but the moral weight of the action is varied. So here's the interesting part. Yes, I think that, equally intentional, we would think equally intentional, but morally different. So the interesting part is that after they read these scenarios, the people who were in these studies were asked 3 questions. Did the perpetrator act freely? Did the person act freely with intention to do this thing? What level of punishment would you apply, right? A large, severe punishment or less so? And crucially, there was this one control question, which was, what is your view of free will in general? Irrespective of the story, do you think that we are free in our actions, or is it a deterministic world where we have no freedom in our actions, and so on? Now that question should be the same for both groups, right? Ideally that shouldn't be affected by the scenario. Wait till you see. So again, in this case, since the intentional part is the same, it's equally, at least what we know about the person who took the action is the same, then what really matters is the severity of the action, and so that would be the determining factor in our punishment, and judgments about intention should not enter in. Well, it turns out that in the actual study that was done, that's not what happened. What happened was that the person who did the more severe thing was judged to have done it more intentionally, had more free will in that choice than the person who took the recycling from the end of the driveway. And that the degree to which they thought it was an intentional action, that was the best prediction of what their punishment would be. So judgments of intention are more important in assigning punishment than the act itself. And so it was a surprising finding. And in addition, so this is a case where, again, it appears as though our desire to punish the person has a strong effect on how we see the actual facts of the case. That we are blinded by our desire to punish the person who does the more severe action. And the other thing is that, in addition, so the moral weight, it should not affect our punishment directly. Did not affect their punishment directly. Instead, it was first their judgment of intention and then the punishment. And we adjust the situation to that. So the other thing that was really interesting was that in addition, between the two groups, there was a difference in their worldview of free will. In the case of the group that read the break-in, where it was a much more severe robbery, they felt as though people had more free will, right? In general, somehow the scenario affected their desire to see the world that way, whereas in the case of just the recycling, it had a lower degree of free will. And so what they were feeling about the person spilled over into a general view of free will and intention. So this is sort of the first half of what I want to say to you, and the second half will have more to do. What I've been talking about in these two studies has been how we judge the actions of other people, right, and our beliefs about other people, and how they can be swayed by our sort of moral impulses towards them. I'm going to move on to similar things, but now it will be things about us, who we are, our values, and in some cases our political ideology, and how that affects our judgment of other people and of facts. So first I have to introduce this, which I'm sure is familiar to many of you out there. and maybe too familiar. Many people have suggested that the trolley problem should be put to bed now. How many thousands of dissertations have been written on it? But I'm sorry, you have to go along with me for this just for a little bit longer. It is now being used, as you may know, to think about the decisions that driverless cars will make, right? How should they be programmed if it veers off the road and it might kill one old woman versus not veering off the road and killing 3 people in the car, or anyway. But so here's the basic setup, and I'll do this briefly because I know so many of you know about it. But so there's a runaway train, a runaway trolley. It appears to be either there's no driver or the driver has no control over the train. And for reasons that seem very sort of artificial and I never really explained, there happen to be 5 people tied up on the tracks right ahead of the train, right? And if nothing happens, those 5 people, we never really hear how they got there, but they're going to be killed. That's obvious, right? And for reasons that are equally unexplained and peculiar, there's a side track that only has 1 person tied up on it, right? And so that's an interesting setup. And then lucky you wander into this situation and wish you hadn't. And you're standing next to the lever, and so you have a choice. You can either do nothing, in which case 5 people will die, or you can throw the lever, and 1 person will die, only 1. The other 5 will be very happy, but then you're involved in that action. So this is often referred to as this business between doing harm, right, and allowing harm to happen, and that's the choice you're in. So just a quick poll here: how many people would throw the lever if you were in that situation? A few, okay. How many people would not throw the lever? Yeah, a lot of not voters in that situation. A lot of people, and that's the way I think I would do. It'd be a hard decision to make. So, again, this is all review for you, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the conflict that is often pointed to is one between a sort of utilitarian view and a deontological view. And so, and of course, this is like just a personal question. We each have different philosophies. There's no right or wrong answer, although the families of the people involved might see it differently. But if you're a utilitarian, you want to maximize utility and happiness, and so 5 dead is obviously not as good as just 1 dead, and so you throw the lever, right? You would, at least your philosophy would urge you to do that. A deontological type would be someone who has strong feelings about right and wrong, and that killing in all circumstances is wrong. And if by throwing the switch I kill this 1 person, which it would be easier to attribute to you, then I shouldn't do it. So we have some of each. It looked like the utilitarians were winning today in the audience, but there were some of each, and that's fine. There's no reason to think that should be different. This kind of thing comes into questions of euthanasia, passive methods versus active methods of ending a person's life at the end of their life, whether they should or not. And this is a setup now to a politically charged topic that will alter the participants' view of whether an action was done deliberately or was allowed to happen. So again, it's an emotional issue that's sort of altering our view of what should be a factual case, although a difficult factual case. So this is a longer scenario which I will read to you, and it's based on the issue of abortion. So Sarah is going to her doctor. Sarah is 2 months pregnant. She goes to her doctor's office for a checkup. After running some tests, Sarah's doctor informs her that the fetus in her womb has a rare vitamin deficiency. If nothing is done, then the fetus's vitamin levels will drop to a level where the fetus will die. The only way to save the baby is for Sarah to begin eating a special diet. If Sarah eats the special diet, the fetus will develop normally. If she does not eat the special diet, the fetus will die within a month. Okay? Sarah has been very worried about the financial and emotional burden of a child. Also, Sarah believes that life does not begin in the first trimester of a pregnancy. After much thought, she decides that she would strongly prefer not to carry the pregnancy to term. For this reason, Sarah does not change her diet, and as predicted, 1 month later, the fetus dies. It's a sad story. I'm sorry about that. So in the United States, and I'm sure here as well, there are very strong feelings on both sides of this. And so what the investigators looked at was the question of, did Sarah make the fetus die? Did she kill the fetus in a doing action, or did she allow the fetus to die? And they were able to also ask the participants how they felt about abortion. In the United States, and I don't know if I know the situation is different here, but in the United States it's legal, but it's also still a very difficult issue for many people. And so there are what are called pro-life people. Of course, we're all pro-life, but pro-life people are ones who are against abortion being legal. And then there are pro-choice people. We're all pro-choice, but they're for it being legal. So they separated out the participants in this study, and lo and behold, what you might imagine happened was that the pro-life participants said that Sarah had made the fetus die, right? And the pro-choice participants said allowed. And again, facts exactly the same. There's nothing different. Everybody read the same story, but the moral weight for the pro-life group was such that they wanted Sarah to have done something active, right? So that she would have have that we would have that urge to punish her and so forth. So here's a case, another judgment about people, a morally fraught one, but it can be separated out by the politics of the individual involved. So I'm going to move a little bit towards politics in a general way, and hopefully I'll upset some people. That's what I'm hoping to do. This is in fact the least surprising graph I will show you today. Republicans in the United States are the conservatives, Democrats are the liberals, and they were simply, in this study, they were simply asked the question, who's more biased, right? And what a surprise. Democrats said, by overwhelming majority that Republicans are biased, and they are not. They're less so. And Republicans had the exact reverse pattern. So we don't see things the same way. But what's interesting is that there's now, and it actually predates the current administration, shall we say, but there's been a lot more interest in psychology in conservatism and liberalism and what they mean and what they say about an individual. And so the personality dimensions of people who describe themselves as liberal and conservative have become much more understudy. And it turns out, the reason I'm including it today is that it has implications for forming beliefs, for coming up with good beliefs versus bad beliefs. And so here's a study that looked at, by the way, I worked the word epistemic in here at this point, but that looked at the kinds of thinking styles, epistemic motivations of people who are conservative versus liberal, right? And so the bottom line is the degree to which the person is conservative, or the trait is correlated with being conservative. And then we have these other thinking styles, right? So very first one, dogmatism. That doesn't sound like a good thing to me. I don't know about you, but dogmatism is the strongest correlation with being a conservatism, a preference for dogmatism. Rigidity coming down the line, intolerance for ambiguity. Obviously, if you're a scientist or if you're a critical thinker or trying to come up with good beliefs, you have to tolerate things not being figured out for a while until we know what the answer is. So tolerance for ambiguity is a positive trait for achieving good, solid beliefs, whereas intolerance is bad. Need for closure, need for structure and order. This is really working out badly for the conservatives, but it apparently is based on data. So, whereas the more liberal you are, the more you're likely. These are smaller correlations, but the more you're likely to be able to tolerate uncertainty. Need for cognition is the idea that you like puzzles, that you like to think about things and try to figure things out, right? Which would be the opposite of need for closure in some sense, right? Closure cuts off thinking and so on. Cognitive reflection and integrative complexity. You know, again, that you like or are okay with complex answers that draw on several sources rather than one simple answer. And you know, while we're on this subject of bashing conservatives, I found an interesting recent study that ties to some of the topics of this series that looks at the simple thing of being able to perform math, right? Just do math. And on the dimension of conservative versus liberal. Now that shouldn't, you know, that should have no bearing, but it turns out that it does. Oh, sorry, I'm lost here. Yeah. Okay, so that this study suggests that that's true. That not only do they perform worse, but they think they perform better than they do. So this is sort of what you may have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This has become very popular at the moment, and so this is an example of that. And I also want to go into a little bit more depth about a study that shows a similar kind of phenomenon when it comes to the issue of vaccination and autism. Now I understand that this has come up in Brazil as well. And so one of the interesting things about people who are opposed to vaccination is that according to at least this study, that there is a sort of Dunning-Kruger aspect to that. That this is a study that was done with a fairly large sample, you can see there, and it was done with a fancy polling company so that it was nationally representative. And it looked at this issue of overconfidence, of being more confident than you should be about medical matters and about autism, and also more confident than you should be about doctors and scientists. So, and then knowledge of autism. So, so we have on the left, this is a little bit tricky to watch, but on the left we have overconfidence, and the red line, I've drawn in the red line to show that that's the point at which the person thinks they actually know the same as experts on the topic. These are just people, but they're being asked whether they know as much as an expert. And you can see that the line on the left there are some people who believe they know more than experts, right? And so that's about autism knowledge, right? And so the people who are to the left, if you're on the left of that graph, you're low on autism knowledge, but you're extremely high on your confidence relative to experts, right? So that's not the way that should work. And then on the right graph, it's your adherence to autism misconceptions, things that are not true about autism. And the higher you go on that, again, your confidence goes up. So this is exactly the opposite. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, except that it's specific to autism so on. As a result, people who had lower support for vaccination in this study was related to higher overconfidence, higher religiosity, lower education, but, and here's the crucial thing, I'm trying to rehabilitate the conservatives a little bit in this part of the story, is that there was a slight liberal thing for this, for vaccination. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not just for conservatives, it's for liberals as well. And it depends on the issue. And so it was not a strong effect, but it tends to. And I want to just delve into this a little bit and suggest that in the case of vaccinations, why there might be resistance to vaccinations, conservatives and liberals can find something that they both, are unhappy about in this particular issue. They both share, in many cases, a dislike for large organizations, right? Powerful organizations. And in the case of conservatives, usually that's the government. The government is trying, at least in the United States, that would be that the government is trying to control us. We want less government. We want them out of our lives. And of course, the government is telling us to vaccinate. The health people in the government are telling us we should vaccinate. Liberals, on the other hand, are okay with the government. They are afraid of big pharma. The people who are making the vaccines, they're just trying to make money. They don't care what it does to us. And so there's something for both groups to like in the anti-vax thing. Which is, in that sense, is unlike other issues in which there is ignorance. Climate change, I actually prefer to use the term global warming because climate change is a propaganda term. You understand that global warming was scary, right? Much of propaganda is kind of marshaling fear. So we want to be fearful of immigrants, right? In the United States, that's a big issue at the moment. We want to be fearful of immigrants and what they're bringing to the country. So we call them, all sorts of bad names and enhance the fear. But the same groups don't want you to be fearful of global warming because that goes in a different political direction. And so the term climate change, which doesn't sound quite as scary, was introduced. But climate change is a much more politically driven topic, and genetically modified foods. Again, I think there's a way in which both groups might be against it, although it tends to be, my observation, my non-scientific observation is that it's liberals who are most against it. So some conclusions about this so far. We are affected by our biases in the way we see even factual things about the world. That we have biases that affect us. Irrelevant factors influence our judgment that should not. In particular, the moral weight of a particular situation can affect our judgment. Prior beliefs that we have, pro-life versus pro-choice, and also our tribe, the group that we belong to, liberal versus conservative. So, to sort of come towards the end, where do we stand with respect to being rational? How do we decide what's the rational thing to do in these situations? I think some people would suggest that when it comes to these moral issues, that we can debate about them. That when it comes to issues of punishment, for example, the fact that we mix up intent with our desire to punish may not be such a bad thing. Nobe is actually very defensive of folk wisdom, folk moral beliefs. I personally think that we should still try to adhere to a rational choice model. One of the points I did not mention, it was on a slide several slides back, is the fact that in the United States there is now a movement towards victim impact statements. I don't know whether you have this or not, but we would do a whole trial to determine whether the person was guilty of breaking the law, right? And if they're not guilty, then it's over. They go home. If the person is guilty, then they stop the process, and victims come in and talk about how painful the experience was and so forth, which of course would raise the moral fervor of the moment and alter our punishment. So my view is that there is value in knowing what the effect of the crime was, but that's likely to cloud the issue. And it has in the United States, for example. There's a thought that it has affected the degree of death penalty judgments that have been made in murders. I still think that the rational choice model should be sort of an aspiration for us, if not a real thing. It's true that we're, in many cases, our personal values are going to enter into it as to what we think are the issues that are high priority versus low priority, and so on. But I think that the model itself is a good one. But we do have work to do. It is the case that, for example, 40% of Americans believe in creationism, the idea that humans were made as they look right now, less than 10,000 years ago. And that's not a good thing, I think. I don't believe that. I hope you don't believe that. And we have work to do. That is a politically charged issue, a religiously charged issue. I found this study of Brazilians, which was done in 2010, a poll, which suggested that 59% of Brazilians believe in evolution as a process, but guided by God, right? Well, I think that's actually progress, right? I mean, they believe in the whole thing, and I'm less concerned about how they think it got started, but we're not doing that well in the United States on that. We have more creationists than you have, and by the way, this graph I found this was something done by science, and these are mostly European countries up top, but the evolution being true is the blue bar, is the blue, right? And the United States is second from the last in belief that evolution is true. Thank goodness for Turkey being underneath there, or else we would be the very bottom. Brazil is not on that list, and that's why I found the other one for you. But anyway, so I just want to sum up my last sort of idea, which is how do we get better at this? And one of the things that I think that we have to acknowledge, first of all, the usual things are important: education, learning how to think critically, and so forth. But we also have to recognize that values enter into beliefs, that people value things differently. And so we have to somehow find ways of bridging the gap. And of course, I put this picture here. This is Greta Tunberg, whom you may know is a 13-year-old Swedish girl who started a huge movement in Europe. This is her sitting in front of Parliament, I think, in Stockholm. She struck and did not go to school on a Friday, and it started with her alone, and tens of thousands of kids now have marched against, in favor of, and I do have it as global, but to combat global warming throughout the world. And she's really been able to make a big movement. She's spoken to the EU Parliament and other large groups. And so the reason I put her here is that she represents an argument that cuts across some of these divisions in the sense that everyone cares about their children. You know, whether you're a conservative or a liberal, you care about your children. And so she sort of forces people to answer the question, you know, if you don't believe that humans are warming the earth, then you're forced to ask the question, what if you're wrong? What if we really are? And what will that mean for your children as well as everyone else's? And so I think that part of the reason she's so effective is that she is young, she is a child, and she represents a way of cutting through the normal divisions that would separate this issue. And so we need more things like that, I think, in order to get people to be on the same page as far as what information means, data means, and good beliefs. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. It was a very enlightening and instructive lecture. I am sure everybody here agrees. And now we open for questions. Anybody wants to? Oh, there, Professor Beni. They are taking a microphone to you. I'd ask people who are doing questions to identify themselves and then proceed to the question, please.
Hi. Thank you for your nice, very good lecture. As you're probably aware,
Is it working?
there are several studies that show that primates, other than humans, they also have moral beliefs. They behave morally sometimes.
Right.
And it means that, may mean, that beliefs are hardwired in our brains. So what would happen with rationality in that case? If it's hardwired, I mean, we cannot change it.
Oh, well, and that's a good question. Do you think that's true? I mean, hardwired, to me, is a interesting phrase. There may be things that are tendencies within us that are part of nature, occur normally. Whether that can then be modified by the environment, we're back to the basic nurture-nature sort of question. But to me, I think that has to, you have to test that. I mean, people have talked about gender differences as being, hardwired, right? And yet, and they do continue to talk that way. And yet, the question is whether those, as well as other things, do men have to be aggressive, because that's hardwired within them, or are there ways to modify that? Yeah, the idea that I'm not familiar with the animal literature on moral judgment. I trust you that it's there and that there are, but I'm not sure that it's a limiting factor. It has to. I mean, I think it's an empirical question as to whether it's a limiting factor.
Okay, so for instance, you should be familiar with Jonathan Haidt.
Yes.
So, and he proposes, I don't know if he's the first to propose it, that political beliefs are also hardwired. So conservatives are conservatives because they are hardwired to be conservatives and the other way around. So it changes everything, actually.
Well, I mean, so how does one person, in that case, then, is it just normal variation that some people become liberals? I mean, it seems to me that I understand. I think that Haidt's work suggests that liberals have basic values, that liberals and conservatives differ on dimensions not unlike these dimensions that I talked about here. Whether, but I don't think that political, I don't personally think that political dimension is hardwired. It tends to, I think it's the case that liberal parents often have liberal children, not because of genetics, but because of what they watch on TV, or the environment that they're brought up in. But so I'm a little more. I would say that my bias is on the nature side. That biology, especially on things, social issues like politics, they may be strong beliefs and values that do affect many parts of our lives, as hate suggests, but I don't think that that necessarily means that they are wired in our bodies genetically. They could be the product of a learning history. This is sort of a basic question about is personality, to what degree is it nature versus nurture? And I would put myself on the nurture end of that. That's my bias. But.
I think there is a Lenin here.
Dr. Vines, is it okay?
Hello.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
My name is Lenin. I'm a sociologist. I think it's safe to say that I learned today a lot about why we often cling to some of our favorite ideas, both the good and the bad ones. I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? We all have our fair share of good and bad ideas, but it is often difficult for us to tell one from the other. With that in mind, I'd like to know your thoughts about the role played by trust in belief formation. Allow me, please, to elaborate a little further. Right now, I think I know a lot of things about belief formation I was ignorant of just an hour ago. But I haven't considered all the relevant evidence on the matter, just a fraction of it, only the evidence you chose to show us today. So my knowledge claim also implies something along these lines. This man in the spotlight really seems to know his stuff. I'll trust him, just like you said you would trust him on matters of biology.
Right.
To anyone who doesn't aim to be an expert at those specific topics, that's more than enough. We live in a society. We must trust one another. But it seems that the very reason many people believe, let's say, that evolution is a lie, also believe so because they find their source more trustworthy. So to what extent is trust itself trustworthy when it comes to belief formation?
Yeah, that's a very good, thank you for the question. I think it's very important. First of all, I like the fact that you used the word trust in particular, because sometimes our trust in a speaker, an individual person who's speaking, is almost like a person-to-person thing. I like him or her. He seems to know what he's talking about, or that person might be someone in your life that you have a long relationship with and has always been kind and good to you. And so now they tell you something that they claim is factual and you don't know. How should I react to that? I guess that what I would say is that it's just as we need information literacy so that people know what's good sources and bad sources. It's useful to be able to say the same thing about the people who give us information. That, to recognize that a biologist who has studied biology, has a degree, not that the degree is in and of itself an indicator, but who we recognize has come from an empirical source of knowledge, what they're saying we assume has, versus someone else, that in those matters we should take that as a stronger evidence, a better source. So, I mean, there's a wonderful short book that was published a while back called The Death of Expertise by a guy named Tom Nichols, who in the United States, who is, by the way, a conservative, but he's very much in favor of experts and the idea that there is such a thing as expert knowledge and that not everyone's ideas are going to be equally valid when it comes to an area of knowledge. And so I think that we have to teach each other to recognize where is what he's saying or what she's saying coming from. Is it coming from true investigation? Is there empiricism behind it? Is there data behind it? Or is it sort of an opinion or base? And am I believing this person simply because I know them or because I value their knowledge, the base of their knowledge? I think that's for me, that's the answer to your question. But it's a good one, and it's a difficult one in today's world.
Hi, my name is Laurivaldo Luca. I'm professor of physiology.
Yes.
And I just like critical thinking to learn something. And thank you for the talk, and thank you for the organization of the talks.
Yeah.
My question is, can we find a similarity between pulling the lever in the trolley and the girl and the Swedish girl in the...
Can I find a similar? Did you have something in mind?
Yeah, I believe there's something similar.
Okay. Can you?
Because in both, it's not only a matter of utilitarian, it's a matter of have the courage to pull the trigger.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And you have to have the courage to go there and stay on the street and by yourself.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes not only a matter of numbers.
Right.
It's also a matter of I have to do something that I shouldn't, but I have to.
Right.
Because the consequence is less harmful. In the case of the weather or the climate change, if you will, well, I don't know how much she knows about this. I don't know her.
Right.
But we are certainly not going to a very good place.
Right, right, yeah.
Human beings.
Yes, yes,
How can we do less harm?
yes.
Well, let's just let things go. I'm not responsible, so
Right.
let it go.
Very-
5 people on the way, I'm not responsible for the trolley.
Yes,
But if I can pull the lever, I can do less harm. And this requires not only perhaps rationality, you have to control your heart to do this.
that's right.
So that's the analogy I would draw. I don't know if you would agree
I like
or,
that. I
or if
like
you would
that
bring
analogy
something
very
else.
much. It's always good when an audience member can answer the question for you. You did a much better job than I would. And I would say that I agree that part of what I'm suggesting is that in many of the ways in which we think badly, right, are not rational, there is emotion involved, either a moral judgment or some kind of feeling involved. And making that work for us rather than against us, is a key. That's why, as I say, the fact that she showed courage herself and took an action, but she's also this young person that is hard not to find appealing no matter who you are, which breeds emotion in us. And of course, climate change or global warming is particularly difficult because the effects are not here now. They're going to be far delayed, and it's I can just let it go, right, and the trolley will go, and so that's why we need to force people to think ahead to the future. It's a difficult problem as a result. Thank you. That was a great observation. I like that.
Hi, my name is Marta, and I have a question concerning liberals and conservatives. So maybe I'm wrong, and I think I'm quite ignorant in the topic, but I think that mostly when you talk about liberals and conservatives, this concerns the US, because
Yes.
from what I feel, mostly the studies that are coming from the US. So is really the conservatism of the US comparable to conservatism of other places and liberalism as well?
I don't know, and I'd ask you that question. I mean, I'm trying to get the audience to answer as many questions as possible, but I don't know if it's comparable. And I'm not suggesting that it's, that these are necessarily fixed things. I think that we're in a moment where, I mean, what it means to, obviously, I'm not the first to say this, but what it means to be a conservative or a liberal changes rapidly. And so I'm not saying that, I would not say that this is a fixed thing at all. It may and there's the same things that are happening, that seem to be mostly happening for conservatives. Some of them are also happening for liberals, and it could flip the other way. So, and I would expect that there are differences across nations in this, and I'm not able to speak to what they are. You are more likely to know them, but yes, it's a good point. Very good point.
Professor, we had a question from the internet.
Oh.
So
Hello, Internet.
This comes from Rogério Privitera. His question is superstitious behavior resembles in any way herd behavior?
It resembles what?
Herd behavior, behavior of
Herds.
multitudes, yes.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, we superstitious behavior often comes from being taught it by people around us, right? And if others are doing it in our group, then we learn to do it. And so, no one grows up, avoiding ladders or believing in the evil eye or even believing in astrology, right? You learn. Someone has to teach you these things, and they make sense to you or they don't. And I think there's a lot of herd mentality in superstition. There's more to it than that as well, but certainly for the ones that we all know and love, or don't love, we learn them from others and go along with them because others do.
Questions? Oh, on there.
Hello, Dr. Weiss. Thank you for the awesome lecture. My name is Daniel. I'm an illusionist. And I was doing a research on the origins of magical thinking.
Yes.
And I came across the idea of survival cost as a reason why we kept relying on it. Do you believe that it still plays an important part on our modern society?
Well, so let's make sure that I understand what you're talking about as far as survival cost is concerned.
I was doing a research for a theme. I'm working on it, and I kept thinking about why humans, primitive humans, I can understand why they created magical thinking, but I was asking myself why we still use magical thinking as a tool, right? And I came across the idea of survival costs because, and that paper I read states that what happened was because we don't understand what's happening, because primitive human beings didn't understand what was happening, they relied on magical thinking and eventually in magic. And that survival cost idea is that because I'm going to try to think about it in English, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Because we can't control the things that we don't understand, we become stressful and we become stressed, and we don't, how can I put that? We don't function well. So the idea of the paper is that primitive human beings didn't work well, didn't produce, they weren't being productive. So relying on magical thinking make them to be more productive and forget about the things that they didn't understand.
It had a psychological benefit.
Yeah. That's better put.
I think that's very much true, and I wouldn't just put it on primitive people. We are the same, and it has not and will not go away, I don't think. We still have things that we don't understand, and we're often in situations in which something important is important to us. We would like it to happen, and yet we can't make it happen. But engaging in a superstition, makes us feel as though we've done one more thing that might work, and so that does provide a psychological benefit. What's interesting, though, is that despite the fact that seems a very obvious aspect and has been written about by many people, there isn't a lot of research to back up that it has anything more than a psychological effect. That it actually helps us in a real way. I believe that it's possible that psychological benefit could also help us perform better, as an athlete might perform better engaging in a superstition first and then performing. But it's been a tricky problem to actually demonstrate in the laboratory, and so. But I think it makes sense, and there is a definite relationship between a desire for control, wanting to be able to control the world, an uncertain world, that persists as a factor in superstition and magical thinking, both in the past and today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wellington. I'm from the Institute for Psychology here, and I am a magician. I'm a illusionist also.
Oh. That's great.
I'm very interested in Yes.
Yes, could you?
Yes,
Right.
we can do it. Okay, Daniel. I'm very interested in psychology of religion, cognitive science of religion.
Mm-hmm.
And a very important topic in this area is the epidemiology of the beliefs or irrational beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to know your perspective about what kind of characteristics have a kind of belief to be more devoted and assumed by people.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Between two beliefs.
Oh, yes.
Identically irrational beliefs.
Identically irrational.
Irrational.
Yes.
What kind of characteristics make a kind of the two beliefs more devoted and more assumed by people?
So what would make someone choose one of these two
Exactly.
over the other? Yeah, I would suggest that there is sort of, in most cases, and again, I'm not an expert in the psychology of religion, but I mean, again, most children end up in the religion of their parents. There is a herd aspect to it, that the environment that you grew up in is the one that you're likely to choose, although many of us rebel. But as far as, I don't think when people choose a religion, I don't think that one of the viewpoints, although there are some exceptions, but I don't think the question of how rational the religion is often the highest priority. I think that what appeals to an individual are other things. I mean, if rationality was something that you valued a lot, my view is that it might not draw you to religion at all, right? It would draw you in another direction. But I'm not, that's the best I can do on that topic. I think that choices among different religions equally irrational are probably going to be due to other factors, social factors.
But if it's not a religion, if it's just two superstitions, I can knock on the wood or kiss a saint photograph, why would people choose one instead of another?
I think it comes down to, as I say, what they've been exposed to. I mean, that's the most. We all learn these things. There are times when you might be exposed to a number of superstitions, and for whatever reason, one makes a kind of sense to you based on your background. And so in that sense, there might be some reasoning process. I mean, it might, for example, we've been talking a lot lately about homeopathy. This is not, could make some enemies in the audience here. It is not a rational form of medicine, but there might be something about the like cures like aspect that appeals to someone and says, oh, that makes sense to me, and they may choose that on that basis. But I'm purely speculating. So.
Hello, Professor, and thank you for your lecture. It was awesome. My name is Roger. I don't think it is difficult to understand why people believe what they believe, general people. But when you see psychologists reading astrology in the morning, when you see doctors who believe in magic,
Right.
Yeah. Things that we just can't imagine. How is it possible? How does it happen? Do we have an answer for that?
I have kind of an answer. I love this question. It's a good one. Just because the image of these people reading their horoscopes or whatever is amusing, but there's been a recent line of research that that draws on Kahneman and Tversky's and other people's idea of the dual process model. So, thinking fast and slow, that we have a quick part of our mind that makes intuitive judgments and is more emotional and less rational. And then we have a slower calculating part of the mind that is the rational one, and so forth. And so Jane Risen, who is at the University of Chicago, has developed a theory of superstition that she calls acquiescence, where people are, and this is a true phenomenon. If we were to interview your psychologist who's reading the astrology page, that person might say, I know this is silly, right? On my rational brain says, I know this doesn't make sense, it's not reasonable, but I just feel better if I do X, Y, or Z, right? And I've heard many people over the years say things just like that. I know it's silly, but I'm going to do, they say things like, I don't want to take a chance, right? That it's, which to me is a funny phrase. So I think that that's a real phenomenon, that some people, and I'm not speaking about anybody in specific, but some people are of two minds. They're at the same time about these phenomena. The rational part of them says this is silly, it can't be real, but and so she says acquiescence because in a sense they're giving in to their intuitive side to do this, and so in some sense I'm actually not as worried about those people. If you're thinking about critical thinking and being rational, I'm not as worried about those people because they know, when push comes to shove, they're going to choose their doctor over, homeopathy. They're going to choose science over. It's just in their day-to-day life they may have some cases where they use it. It's the true believers, the ones who are not. I mean, maybe these individuals are true believers, but the true believers, the ones who are not in conflict, they just believe in astrology, period, and they think it's real and you can't talk them out of it. Those people I'm much more worried about than the others.
I don't believe in witches, but they exist.
Exactly.
If I can make another question,
Sure.
maybe something related.
The first
to,
one was so good that I'm
Well,
happy to have a second one.
but maybe I don't have an answer for the question.
Okay. Oh.
Do you know if in this polls about creationism versus evolution,
Sure.
or homeopathy versus
Right. Traditional.
scientific medicine,
Yes.
flat Earth versus round Earth, did the poll go further and ask like this: how do you know that evolution is true? And did you ever check if that's true?
Right.
And why you believe that evolution is true?
Right.
And the same kind of question for all other, like flat
Yes.
Earth
No.
and so on.
Yes. I mean, you make a good point. This comes back to the other point about who do we trust with information? Why do you believe? Even if the answer is right, if you probe the person as to why they believe it, you may get answers that you're not happy about. I do think that it's even for people who may have fairly sound beliefs, it's important to teach them, to evaluate those beliefs and to think and to look again at how do we know, what is the evidence for evolution, teach the whole picture, in a sense, teach the story of both. I'm not saying on equal footing, but teach the story of evolution along with the basic idea, and so that they know what it's based on. But I agree with you. I think that these light bulbs here are working because of electrons going through a wire, right? Well, how many of us have seen an electron, and how many of us actually know that? We were told that by somebody, right? And so that has to be, we have to think about that, and that's part of the educational process as well.
So, hi, my name is Francisco, so thank you for the talk. So I am from the Department of Pharmacy, and the thing that I have been noticing lately is that there are a lot of people that have like higher education, like they go through their bachelors, and they still believe in a lot of nonsense. And the thing that I have been thinking about is that the fact that people just absorb a lot of knowledge from their studies or from the internet, God forbid, makes them like overly confident on their ability to differentiate bullshit from like actual knowledge. And what I wonder is like, what would you suggest for like changing in the current education system, so that people they don't take whatever they read so much on faith, but rather they question like in which way or what was the method that was used to develop or to discover that knowledge, so that we don't have like people with engineering degrees or scientific degrees going around like working on homeopathy or astrology, or because I have seen like it all. So yeah, that would be my question. Like I have my own ideas about it, but I would like to know what you think about it.
Well, I'd like to know yours too. Again, in my goal to get the audience to answer as many questions as possible. I think that one of my sort of pet peeves is that the normal person who goes through school thinks of science as a collection of facts, right? That you read a biology book and you read about animals, you read about the human body, you read about whatever, and so the content of science is what people understand as being science, right? And there's no, in that process, there wouldn't necessarily be any difference between a history book, which tells you the facts of the past, and a science book, which tells you the facts of certain animals or whatever. I think that it's very important, and we do a bad job of this, is teaching the basis in science as a process. Science is not a fact. I think it was the great philosopher Ricky Gervais who said that if all the science books in the world were to burn today, right, over time they would all come back, right, because the process of science would produce that same result over and over again. And it's that process that's important. If people understand that we figured out some methods for understanding the world, and they work, and that doesn't mean they're perfect. We're changing them, and evolving psychology in particular has some problems, doing good research, but we're learning, and so I think that's part of it, is that we have to do a better job of teaching people what the basis of the knowledge is, not memorizing different species of animals or something.
Okay, yeah, my think would be more or less the same direction, because I started getting more interested in skepticism and critical thinking only during my PhD, because that was the point when I realized that you cannot trust what is out there, like even scientific publications, like there's a lot of nonsense that gets published, so you really have to start making the hard questions and realize that nobody really knows, like we're all working towards it.
I mean, that's what, the Dunning-Kruger effect, the other side of the Dunning-Kruger effect is, we talk about the fact that people who don't know very much are very confident in their beliefs. But the other end of the coin is that the more you know, the more uncertain you are about you know enough to know that we don't really know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's important. That's an important thing to teach people, so anyway.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello,
Hi.
Dr. Stewart. Tudo bem? I have a question. I am psychologist. My name is Igor. In your opinion, forgiveness is a rational decision?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
That's the question. This is a interesting. Are you talking just in general, forgiving someone who does harm or does something wrong, or what is there? Are you thinking of a particular context, or?
And I considered forgiveness interpersonal, then considered a transgression or offense and perceived.
Yeah, I think I mean, this is, to me, this is just a personal question. It's not something that I have any scientific evidence or anything to back up. But I am something of a utilitarian, you know. So the question of that the utilitarian asks oneself in that situation where someone you know may have done something wrong or that you think is wrong, is what's the next thing I can do to improve the situation? And that might lead you to forgiveness, you know, or to some kind of, at least not total rejection of the person. Because if the person has done something wrong, then you may have a way of helping them in the future. But your question, I think, gets at values that we may all share or not share. I don't have any, you know, they're not, to me, they're not based in an empirical thing. Is there something else you were thinking about, though?
Okay, I have another question. Is global warming is evidence or belief? O aquecimento global, né?
Is global warming an evidence or is it a belief?
So I think there is, and again, where I'm relying on experts who study it, I'm not one. But I think there is very strong evidence that that the planet is warming, and that it is at least partly caused by humans. But so I wouldn't see that as being a belief. I would see that as being strong evidence that supports that idea. I think other people do. There are people who are non-scientists or who devalue science, who see it as a belief. You know, something that is like forgiveness. You could either be for or against, right?
Hi, doctor. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
My name is Ron. First, thank you for the lecture.
Sure.
I'm a recently graduated medical doctor.
Oh.
I think most of the questions relates to my question, but I think the answer you gave related more to academics than to lay people.
Okay.
My question is, I think one of the problems we have between with lay people accepting public policy is that they think they know better, and then they just like anti-vaccine.
Yes, like the study.
Yeah, considering, and that's a hard one, that we have public policy based on the best evidence we have. What would be the best approach for lay people to accept that? Is it making them know the issue that they are misinformed, or is it having them accept that they are ignorant and accepting something coming from above?
Yeah.
It's kind of forceful, but I don't mean it that way.
Yeah, it sounded that way.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm sure, I don't think no one likes to be told that they're ignorant, and yet that's sort of what, you know, sometimes has to happen.
Think of a more humble way of accepting.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry.
I understand, and we'll work on that. You know, my view, I'm not sure. You know, there is research on how to persuade the public on certain things, and there is actually research that suggests, you know, whether an emotional appeal in certain circumstances is better than a rational appeal, and so on. And so I would defer to that that data, which I'm not familiar with myself. But I get your point that trying to teach just everyone on the planet the process of science might not work. But the original question was about college graduates, I think, who still engineering majors and so forth. And it seems to me that at that level, you know, that person would have had to have taken science classes as part of their degree process. There's no reason why that science couldn't be taught. And there's some evidence that even at lower levels that science could be taught differently for children. It couldn't hurt to do that as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions? Oh, one over there.
Thank you for the talking. I have 3 questions, but only one. I will do only one.
Oh.
I think. Okay. You start to talking with the dichotomy of actions and beliefs.
Yes.
And I observe all the studies that you brought us are about surveys. Most of them are surveys. So they are studying about beliefs, most of it. Mm-hmm. Discourse and opinions. Mm-hmm. I want to know if there are studies about actions in laboratories or in real contexts, and because I think it's very different to talk about what we do with and to choose in a
right in a laboratory.
Yes, and in real life, the trolley problem.
Yes.
I have no idea what I will do it because it's a situation that you just act and later you explain it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that this is the problem of all laboratory research, and of course, and I encounter that often, and that it's not like the real world. There are no people lying on tracks that we've heard of yet. It's a nice story, but. And so laboratory research has the benefit of being controlled, and you can design a scenario that has only a few words changed in 2 different conditions and so forth. But we don't know whether it really relates to what people believe in the real world. I would argue that the basic idea that the level of harm caused by an individual does affect the degree to which we think they did it intentionally. I think that's shown in these studies. It seems to me that we see that around us in the courtroom and just in our interactions with people. But that is always a problem. And so this represents, I mean, one of the other messages of science, right, is that you find a phenomenon in one example, one context, then you go on and try to see if you can make it happen in a different one later or in the real world. And then you have a real continuum. So these are just a starting point. They were, for me, good examples because they were easy to understand and so forth. But we need to do more work to be sure and to make it drive policy or other things.
Do you recommend any studies specific for I read?
That you read?
Yes.
Not offhand.
With actions, with choices.
In the real world, or just in the?
Could be in labs, but the people to choose and not to just say that I will do it if I could.
Oh, I see. Making real choices in a laboratory setting. I mean, there are experiments that do that, not necessarily in this domain that I'm familiar with, but there are ones in which the consequences of the choice are real. People get real money or something happens. So there are many examples that these kinds of questions are harder. You're asking someone to assign a punishment, right? Now that's an action in a way, right? I would choose this punishment, but it's in a laboratory because we can't really in the real world do that. So there are limitations, but your point is a valid one. Probably the way to do it would be to go to actual cases in the world where people have the power to, and then interview them in those contexts and so on. But I'm not familiar with those studies. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any more? No? Oh, okay.
Well, sorry, but
sure.
There was something that was one of the questions from this side.
Yes.
Was about belief and evidence.
Yes.
And then I ask what belief is. How do we define belief? How can we say that? I mean, for me, belief is something that you don't take for evidence.
Right.
But if there is belief with evidence, what belief or even trust is? What's the difference between these?
So I think that belief without, I mean, we can get tangled up in the words, and I don't actually like the word belief because I think it means something for, philosophers, for example, right? Reasons or beliefs that philosophers use and then we use the word in a different way. You're talking about, when you talk about a belief based without evidence, then I think faith, you take on faith that you don't have any evidence, just your personal belief. So I don't really, I think we have a problem with the language, but if we call it all belief, then I think that the belief based on evidence has to be thought of as, people ask you, do you believe in global warming? Well, if you do, so to speak, you say, I see this evidence, I think it's decent evidence, and so I think it's probably true. And 90% of scientists say that. That's a belief, if you want to call it such. But I think we have to come up with better terms that make that separation. Language is a problem. Even when we're all speaking the same language, it's a problem. And so there is a tendency to think of a belief as being something without evidence. But people also use it to say, I believe in evolution, or I believe in global warming, or I believe in. So until we use different words for those two contexts, we're going to be in trouble.
Hi, just something that just occurred to me.
Sure.
Based on an argument about words.
Yes.
And isn't evidence also a charged word? I mean,
yes.
we could talk about facts.
Right.
Could sound more
even
neutral.
But
I think perhaps evidence can be construed as the facts we construe as supporting our beliefs.
Yes.
So it's a second nature of facts that they become evidence for whatever we feel they should.
No, evidence is a problematic word too. Everybody. There was a move. There's a movement within skepticism and in science that they started to talk about evidence-based theories, right, or evidence-based practices in medicine. But then again, well, what is evidence? Well, it worked for me. Is that evidence? Or it worked for my friend Joe. Is that evidence? And so people have now started to use the phrase science-based theory or science-based practice to mean a more narrow definition of what evidence is. And so, it would be good if we could come up with terms that really made a clear definition. In some ways, I think there is a benefit to the vagueness, because someone says, I know this to be true, right? Then the next question you ask should be, how do you know it's true? In other words, it forces us to get down into what's underneath that belief, and that's a good thing. But I also think that there's a lot of confusion in the language.
So, any more questions? If not, I'll do one of mine, and we will close the event. My question is something that puzzled me on the experiment of the girl was pregnant.
Yes.
And had to choose the diet, because I suppose that people with different moral positions could agree in the words and then just say that it was right or wrong. She allowed the fetus to die, and she had the right to do so, or she allowed the fetus to die, and it was wrong. Right. Instead of that, they changed the verb. Why do you think that the moral judgments color even the choice of words in this kind of situation?
I think that the answer is that we are not as logical as the rational choice model would have us be. That once we decide that something is bad, we sort of throw the whole thing at it, right? So it would be worse if it were a free choice and the person did it. The action itself is bad, so let's add some free choice to make it worse, and I'm more justified in my feelings towards that person. So we are a complicated animal, and we are not. I mean, the dual processing model has split us into two halves. There are probably more pieces than that, but I think that's the answer to the question: is that we we tend to use a shotgun approach to our judgments.
So, well, thank you, Dr. Weiss. It was a very enlightening afternoon.
Thank
and,
you.
Hope to hear more from you during this week and other events.
It's
Thank
my
you.
pleasure. Thank you to the audience.
Oh yes, I don't have the schedule on my mind right now, but Dr. Weiss will be giving a course, a workshop at the Psychology Institute tomorrow. Tomorrow morning at 9. Could you?
Okay, so for those who want to see him again, he will be giving a workshop at the Institute of Psychology tomorrow, 9 o'clock. I think you can still enroll online. And he'll give a talk at Livraria Cultura on Saturday at Paulista at 9:30. Yep, at 9:30 at Livraria Cultura. And I don't know if you can still enroll, but you can show up and try, because people enroll and then they don't show up, so usually there are places. And we continue with the cycle of seminars, so you can check in the Institute of Advanced Studies website, and they have the program for all the cycle of seminars about the epistemology of ignorance. We're going to have every other week, right? Yeah, every other week until, I think, November. So check the website and you can see the other lectures there. Okay, and thank you all so much for coming. And thank you, Dr. Weiss, again, for a wonderful lecture.
My pleasure.